Hi everyone, welcome back to my chapter today for styling. So after our last chapter, we're able to build a basic HTML structure for our heading and for our cart section in here for the plans and the pricing. So as you can see on the left side, that's what we achieved our HTML, but still look very ugly. We need to make it beautiful, and that's when CSS comes in. So CSS, keep in mind, it's not a programming language. It's just a way of styling and presentation for your HTML document. Okay, so what is CSS? Okay, so what do we need to know about CSS? The CSS follow a very basic structure or syntax. And if you go here, it will show you it have a selector, and then it have opening bracket and closing bracket, and then in between you have properties. Okay, so these properties like here, so this, for example, here they're using P, which is stand for paragraph, if you remember in our HTML. That's a way you can use a selector. Okay, we will start learning one by one, but one of them is that you can use the HTML tag names as selectors. Then you open the bracket and close the bracket, and in between you list the properties you want to style. Okay, so let's say, for example, he's here, they said I want all the paragraphs in my web page to have a color red, and I want it to be aligned in the center, to have a middle center text. Okay, that's all what it means. So as you can see here, it's explained. So P is in a select and CSS. It points to the HTML element you want to style, which is the P paragraph. You remember before you use the E tag, means you can use an E tag here. Just put an A and write what you want styles here to be changed. We did what? The H1, you can write here an H1, then opening, closing bracket, then here your style for whatever you want. So it's very straightforward, okay? You don't need to remember all these properties here. Trust me. Don't spend time on trying to memorize it. Just know the syntax, and as you go, you will start memorizing them by practice. It will be just a default statements or default things in your brain. Okay, don't do like me and waste before I wasted weeks and months trying to memorize and feel like I'm hopeless because I can't remember them, because there's just so many and you can't remember all of them at once. But by experience you'll get to know them and remember them, and if you don't, you know that something exists, you just Google it out and you will know what to do. Okay, so that's what all CSS it is. Okay, now let's go to selectors. So I told you this one is a selector. There are many selectors you can use, not only the HTML tag names like paragraphs or anchor or H1 or H2. There are other selectors you can use. So if I jump here, you'll find you have simple selector, okay, which is element based on the name or ID or class. So let me elaborate on that one. Okay, so you have your tag, your p tag element, okay, and that p tag can have an ID, for example. And what is an ID? I will go back here and I'll say, for example, here this div, you can add an ID, and that's unique identifier. Okay, and you give us my unique, I don't know, wrapper. Just remember one thing, this ID have to be a unique. You can't have the same one somewhere else here. I can't do this. I can't take this and use same ID in other tag. My app will not just work, or things will fall apart without even an errors. That's not a tricky thing in front end, is that sometimes you have things wrong but your console log doesn't throw errors. Okay, so you can't do that. You can't have same ID value in here. Okay, I can create an ID for whatever I want, but use something different. Let's say my unique heading, I don't know, or header, because this one is header. Okay, so that's called ID. Okay, so that one usually is very useful. We want to target some elements to do some specific styling or some specific functionality later when you learn JavaScript. So that's a way you can pick up, oh, I want this div, or I want this element in this list. So you can just add IDs here and you can target them using JavaScript or even using CSS. Okay, so back to our selectors. So let's say I have ID of header. Okay, And let's say I will go to I'll create a CSS file, and let's call it new file, call it whatever you want. Again, I'll call it styles. Just make sure the extension is .css, and there we go. So I said I want to target my header using the ID selector, so that's called a selector. Okay, I'll say what I call it, my unique header. So I go back here, I'll do hash, that's for an ID, and put your ID that you did there. And I'll say, for example, background color, and so you can see it, guys, here, background color red. Save, and it didn't work. Why is that? Let me open it up. And these guys will be your best friend. Just here, your console for JavaScript, and here for HTML. So here's my header. Oh, there we go. I forgot one important thing. So I created the CSS file. You need to import that CSS file in your HTML page. So how you do it? You create a link, okay, and you say source. No, you say ref and styles.css and save. Okay, that didn't work, and the reason is we need to add an attribute called relation. So rel equal, and we say it is a style sheet. We have to tell the link what type of link we are having. So called style sheet, and there we go. Nice, right? So remember, you create your CSS file, name it whatever you want, just make sure your extension is .css. Then you come to your HTML page. Between the head tag and the top of your page, add a link tag, make a ref with the link to your file, and make sure your relation is called style sheet. Okay, as I want you guys to build best practices of writing your code, you have to learn also how to structure your pages. So usually I will have a folder called styles, or call it CSS, and I'll put my styles file because you may have many at some point. So make your styles all enter there, and then here of course I have to do /css. I call it CSS. There we go. Okay, so we are able now to create our style sheet file, we're able to import it, and we're able to use an ID selector to have a style. Okay, now the other selectors, you may have something called classes. So classes, what is good is that class you can use it in different elements as you want, not like an ID. Okay, let's say here, I don't know, in the LIs we have product and we have pricing, review. Let's add a class name here because I want these elements to have a same class at some point. Menu, item, single. And for classes, I can use them everywhere I want. I can replicate them. Just make sure you use them in the places you want them to have same styling. What I'm doing here for these two, because I know these two don't have a subheading, so they will have same styling. Okay, I'll come here to my UL. I'll say menu because that's my menu list. Okay, so what I will do, I will say, for example, this menu list, and see how we do now for the class. We do a dot, then class name. So for your ID, you use a hash, and for a class, you use a dot. Okay, and then we open and close, and let's say list style type. You see here we have some dots. I want them to not be there. Okay, you can see in our design, if I open it, we don't have these dots here. Okay, so I'll just say none. Okay, you see here, they're gone. And as you see, the one beneath it, the nested one, which is another UL, it's still having those styles, which I don't want them as well. So either you can again add a class here, or for me, I know that whatever URL under that menu list will never have that. Or what I will do is I will say, okay, inside my menu list, any URL also beneath it, I want it to not have that style. I'll say list style type none. You see, gone. Nice, right? Now, what other selectors we have? Okay, let's say I want to use the selected element itself. Okay, I will go, for example, to my main and inside my section, and I want to target this H1. Okay, I'll say, okay, in H1, which means if I do this, anytime I use a H1, it will have this styling. What I will do, little bit cheating that you learn at some point, I'll see which style I'm using here. I will just copy and paste it. Okay, you see here they are using the color. I'll use that color, and they're using font size here, and they're using, I don't know, I'll just say font weight is 400. Okay, I don't need to be exactly same like them because that's just for learning. So you see here, my color has changed, the font size has changed. But as I said, remember, if you do this to H1, means any H1 later it will have same styling. However, if you want to modify that another H1 you're using, you can just add a class again to that H1. If you want, I don't know, to have a color red, but same font size, same font weight. You just do again H1 dot, I don't know, my special heading. And you can say, I don't know, color red. And if I go here, I create another H1. For example, I'll say class equal my special heading. See here, it's become red. Okay, so if you go and inspect it, you see here, that's the origin H1. We had this color, this font size, this font weight, but I override it. That's called overriding. Okay, so I override that heading with another color using a class. So as much you go very specific in your selectors, as much that will be overriding the previous one. So of course H1 is very generic. You add a class, become more specific, so that one will override this one. And if you do, for example, an ID, that will be much more specific than a class, and that will override this one, and so on. So all these things you will get to learn them by in mid of the way. As this course doesn't focus fully on CSS, I'll just give you an overall idea, and I'll create full crash course on CSS only so we can tackle all these scenarios. But I just wanted to have it like a heads up, you know these things exist, and if you create something that doesn't work, at least you know how to debug it or how to go and Google it around and find answers and solutions. Okay, so basically that's a quick introduction to CSS. We played around a little bit with it. We saw how we can import a file, how we can use a tag name as selector, how we can use a class name as selector, how we can use an ID as a selector. Okay, so in our next chapter, we will go exactly and style this heading to match our website in here. Okay, and we'll dive into the CSS very well. Okay, so stay tuned and see you in the next chapter.